Well, as President Biden now recovers from COVID, CBS News is learning that he could leave the race in a matter of days. That's according to two senior House Democrats. And last night, Senator Jon Tester of Montana became the second U.S. senator to publicly call on Biden to withdraw his bid for the White House, saying in a statement, "While I appreciate his commitment to public service and our country, I believe President Biden should not seek re-election to another term." We also know high-profile Democrats are huddling about his prospects, including former President Barack Obama and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who is also in close touch with leaders Senator Chuck Schumer and Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. And in another blow to the president, a new CBS News poll taken in the days after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump shows Trump with a growing advantage in a national race. It's his largest national lead in the campaign so far. So for more on this, let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman. You are in Rehoboth, Delaware, which is where the president is recuperating from his COVID diagnosis. All right, so is the president, from what we are hearing, perhaps becoming more open to the conversations that he's having with some of his fellow Democrats? We now have 20 congressional Democrats who have publicly said he should step aside. We don't know how many may be talking privately.
Hey there, Anne Marie. Good to be with you this morning. Well, President Biden is reportedly more receptive to these conversations that he's hearing from not only top leadership like former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, leader Chuck Schumer, and others, but all of these Democrats, all of these messages that he's receiving in terms of his standing in the political race. For the most part, publicly, the president continues to say, in both in interviews and via campaign statements, that he's in it to win it, that he wants to run for president of the United States because he wants to finish the job. That's the campaign slogan that the president often uses. And I'll point out that last night, or early this morning rather, the campaign sent out a memo criticizing former President Donald Trump for things such as overturning Roe v. Wade and not mentioning Project 2025. And that statement also said that President Joe Biden is running because he has a different vision for the country, essentially. So you still have the campaign and the president saying that he's in this race, but behind the scenes, reportedly, we are hearing, as you mentioned, that the president could potentially leave the race while he, of course, is recovering from COVID-19. And just a really quick update there, we did receive an update from his physician that said essentially that the president is doing well, that he doesn't have a fever. He continues to take Paxlovid, but of course, he is still recovering from COVID.
All right, Willie, thank you very much. Well, let's pivot over to Nikole Killion now. Nikole, you are in Washington, and we're going to continue to sort of keep this conversation up about some of the reporting that we're hearing, that may be a decision. We may hear some sort of announcement coming over the weekend or the coming days anyway. If President Biden, though, were to suspend his reelection bid, what do we know, or do we know if the Democrats have a plan to move forward? I think part of what is most challenging about this conversation is we haven't really heard a clear alternative. And I wouldn't be surprised if the president is also sort of waiting to hear a clear alternative.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, certainly you have to be braced for any and all possibilities. But on the same token, I would say that some sources have told me that, some of this talk may be a bit premature. And if you take the Biden campaign at its word, they have said pretty unequivocally that the president is staying in the race and that they are not looking at any other options right now. And that being said, I think that also speaks to what could be the path forward. We certainly have heard in the event, if the president were to step aside from the 2024 race, that it seems that the vice president, Kamala Harris, would be the heir apparent. And while there is certainly support among a number of congressional members, if that scenario were to occur, on the same token, there is not unanimity in terms of whether she is the best one to be positioned in that role. Certainly from a campaign cash standpoint, she would inherit the president's war chest. I mean, it's part of hers as well, being on the ticket. But, any other startup candidate would have to start from scratch. And we heard the president in his press conference about a week or so ago say, and express concern about the difficulty of starting from scratch. So from that standpoint, I think that's why some are also trying to tamp down this talk of a potential exit, because at the end of the day, we know that this is the president's decision and his alone.
On a couple points, and I just want to pick up on the last one that you said. Of course, we're keeping a tally of every Democrat that comes out publicly, but it's still only 20. There are plenty of other Democrats that are not coming out publicly. But I'm curious about what the reaction has been. Have you spoken to lawmakers who are concerned about this drip, drip, drip of criticism that the president is receiving, that ultimately this is damaging his prospects? And if he decides that he wants to continue to run, which is what he said, they're not helping him regain any momentum.
Well, I think there is some concern, particularly among those who support the president, that this is not productive. We have seen a number of members come out and say, look, can we, just wish the president well in terms of his recovery and not attack him? And, we've seen other members of Congress, criticize some of these leaks that have been happening, too, particularly in terms of some of the leaks around some of the conversations that leadership may be having. So there is some innate frustration, I think, among members, and many of them have expressed that to me even, before this week, that, really we just need to kind of turn our attention, focus on November. There's not that much time left. But on the same token, the faction of lawmakers who really have some serious concerns about the polling, about the president's viability, they really do strongly feel that if they are going to make a change at the top of the ticket, this is the time to do it.
Nikole, Killion, thank you so much.